is a road that only appears at the end of a long day, not on any map, not in any guide, but in the particular slant of amber light that falls just before dusk, when the air holds still and the body finally admits it is tired. Maren found it on a Tuesday. She hadn't been looking for anything in particular. She had only been driving. One of those long, purposeless drives she took when the week had pressed too firmly against her, when the hours had accumulated into a weight she couldn't name. The hills outside the small town of Graving rose and fell around her in slow, unhurried waves, and the sky had gone the color of old gold, the kind you find in a painting that has been loved for a very long time. She had taken a left where she'd always taken a right. That was all. The road narrowed gradually, as though it was gently discouraging hurry. Gravel replaced tarmac. The trees on either side grew older and taller, oaks, she thought, with the wide, patient posture of things that have stood long enough to stop caring about time. Their branches met above the road in a loose, easy canopy, and through the gaps, the sky showed through in small, soft shapes. Maren rolled the window down. The air smelled of crushed leaves and something else, something faintly sweet, like dried flowers or warm beeswax. She breathed it in without meaning to, and felt, without knowing why, that she had arrived somewhere, not at a destination, at a feeling, the specific, quiet feeling of permission. The road curved once more, very gently, and then the crossing appeared. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply there, the way a good thing always is. A low stone bridge over a narrow stream that moved with the soft, unhurried sound of water that has learned not to rush. Beside the bridge stood a signpost, old and slightly tilted, carved from dark wood. The letters had been worn smooth by years of weather, but she could still read them in the remaining light. Vellmoor Crossing, and below it, in smaller letters, all who arrive here are welcome to rest. Maren sat with the engine idling, reading those words twice. she felt something loosen behind her sternum, something she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She turned off the engine and simply sat for a moment in the quiet, listening to the stream below and the long exhale of the evening wind moving through the oaks. Then she got out of the car. The bridge underfoot was solid and cool. The stones fitted together so closely and so cleverly that not a single one rocked beneath her step. The stream beneath was shallow. She could see the pebbles on its bed, pale gray and ivory, each one wan to a smooth oval. The water caught the last of the light and gave it back gently, and Maren stood there for a little while, watching it. On the far side of the bridge, a lane continued, lined with hedges of some low, flowering shrub she didn't recognize, small white blossoms barely open that nodded faintly in the evening air. The lane curved away between them, and at its end, just visible through the gathering blue of dusk, a light was burning. It was the warm, private light of a place that expects you. She didn't question it. Later, she would wonder at how entirely unafraid she had been, how the sight of that amber glow in the window had felt not unfamiliar, but deeply, quietly ordinary, as though she had seen it many times before in the long background of her imagination, as though some part of her had always known it would be there, waiting on the other side of a left turn she'd always been meaning to take. The gravel of the lane was fine and pale, and her footsteps on it made the softest sound, a slow, rhythmic crunch that matched her breathing, that matched the fading pulse of the day. The white blossoms were close on either side of her, and she noticed that they had a faint fragrance, nothing insistent, nothing demanding, something cool and green beneath something sweet, something honest. She walked slowly. The building at the end of the lane came gradually into focus. It was an inn, or something that wore the memory of an inn, something older and more settled than the word suggested. Stone walls, deep-set windows, a roof of dark slate that had acquired the particular gray-green of lichen over many years. A chimney rose from the left end of the roofline, and from it, a thin column of pale smoke rose straight and slow into the windless air above. The sign above the door was smaller than the one at the crossing. It read only the threshold. 2 stone steps led up to the door. In the shallow depression of the lower step, someone had placed a small jar, clear glass, with a candle inside it, the flame steady and unconcerned. Beside the jar, a sprig of dried lavender, its purple long faded to gray, but its shape intact, leaning against the stone as though it had been set there for exactly this purpose. Maren climbed the 2 steps. She raised her hand to knock, and then the door opened without urgency, without surprise, as though the opening of it had simply been the next thing that would happen, as though she had been expected not today specifically, but eventually, as though the inn had been waiting with the patient certainty of something that knows it will be found. In the doorway stood a figure, tall, unhurried, with the calm of a person who has nowhere else to be. He said nothing yet. He only looked at her with the quiet, receiving attention of someone who sees without requiring anything in return. Maren lowered her hand and stepped inside. The warmth of the inn did not rush out to meet her. It was simply there, as though the room had always been warm, as though warmth was a quality of the walls themselves, something the stone had absorbed over decades and now offered back slowly, constantly, without fanfare. Maren felt it settle over her shoulders as she crossed the threshold, the way a familiar blanket might if you hadn't known you were cold. The man who had opened the door stepped aside with the ease of someone who understood the value of giving space. He was older, not elderly, but somewhere in that dignified region of later life where the face has stopped changing and simply is. His hair was silver and close cropped, his eyes a steady, undramatic gray. He wore a plain woolen waistcoat, the color of dark moss, over a shirt of cream linen, and his hands, she noticed his hands, were the hands of someone who worked with them, not roughly, but thoughtfully. The hands of a person who fixed things by attending to them. "Take your time," he said. Those were his first words. Not welcome, not good evening, not can I help you. Take your time. As though he had observed that she needed it and found the observation entirely unremarkable. Maren stepped further into the room and looked around. The entry opened directly into a large, low-ceilinged space. A common room, she thought, though no term quite suited it. There were chairs, deep cushioned, various, none of them matching, arranged in small clusters around the room, as though they had drifted there of their own accord over years, and simply stopped where they felt right. A long wooden table stood against one wall, its surface wan to a warm honey tone by use, holding a row of mismatched candles in holders of glass and pewter and pale clay. Every one of them was lit. At the far end of the room, a fireplace. The fire in it was not large. It was a careful, consistent fire, the kind that someone tends with patience, adding just enough wood at just the right intervals to keep it steady without extravagance. Above the mantel hung a clock. It had no hands. She stared at it. The clock face was carved wood, old and beautiful, with a dark patina that came only from time and handling. The numerals were there, Roman, carved deep, but the mechanism had long since stopped, or perhaps had never included hands at all. And in their place, the face held only a small carved image at its center, a bird with its wings folded, sitting still. "It measures something else," the man said from behind her quietly, not intrusively. "Not ours." She turned. He had moved to stand near the table of candles, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, and he was looking at the clock with the mild, affectionate expression of someone regarding an old companion. "What does it measure?" Maren asked. He considered the question without hurry. "Rest," he said, "the kind that doesn't keep time. She didn't entirely understand this, but she didn't feel compelled to press it. There was something about the room, about the candles, the fire, the lack of any window that showed the outside world, that made urgency feel very far away. She felt no pressing need to understand everything at once. That, she realized, was unusual for her. "I'm Maren," she said. "I know," he said pleasantly. "I'm the Warden." He said it without grandeur, the way you'd say I'm the caretaker, or I'm the one who keeps the lights on. A job, a purpose. His purpose, evidently, for a very long time. "Warden of what?" she asked. "Of this." He made a small, inclusive gesture, not grand, but complete. The room, the fire, the candles, the clock without hands, the deep and patient warmth of the walls, of the crossing, the threshold, the space between the road and the rest. He moved then to one of the chairs nearest the fire, a broad, low thing upholstered in faded green, its arms worn smooth and pale at the places where hands had rested over years. He indicated the chair beside it, smaller, with a woven blanket draped over its back. He did not sit until she moved toward it. She sat down. The cushion yielded slowly, perfectly, and she felt herself settle into it the way you settle into sleep. A gradual, gentle subsidence, a giving over. She hadn't realized how tired her back was until the chair relieved it of its effort. On the small table between the two chairs sat an oil lamp of amber glass, and the Warden reached across without looking and adjusted the wick slightly downward. The light in the room softened by a single degree, just enough. "There's no obligation here," the Warden said. "You don't need to explain how you arrived or what you were looking for. You don't need to be interesting or productive or any particular version of yourself." He paused. "You only need to be still if you can manage it." Maren looked at the fire. The flames moved in their slow, private language, forward, back, side to side, and she found her eyes following them without effort, without thought, the way the eyes do when the mind has finally released them from duty. somewhere in the ceiling above her, a beam settled with a low, woody sound. The inn breathed around her. She pulled the woven blanket from the back of the chair and drew it over her lap. Outside, on the other side of those deep stone walls, the night was continuing its unhurried arrival. But in here, there was only the fire and the amber lamp and the clock without hands measuring something that had no name, and the warden sitting quietly in his chair as he had sat. She somehow knew for a very long time. She let her eyes close just a little, just for a moment. She must have drifted just at the edges of sleep, that loose twilight drifting where the body stops insisting and the mind lets go of its grip, one finger at a time. She came back to herself gradually, without alarm, the way you surface from a warm bath, unhurried, aware of the warmth of the room before she was aware of anything else. The fire had settled, not gone down, simply settled, as a fire does when it reaches its own understanding. The larger logs had become their embers, glowing in a deep coral orange, and above them, a small, lively flame still moved at the edge of the nearest log, as though unwilling to surrender entirely. The warden had not moved. He sat in his chair as he had sat before, without tension, without the particular quality of waiting that implies impatience. He was simply present as the fire, as present as the walls. He had a book open in his lap, but he was not reading it. He was looking at the middle distance with an expression of such complete, uncomplicated calm that Maren felt something in her chest ease at the sight of it. She had forgotten, she realized, what real stillness looked like on a person's face. "How long have you been here?" she asked, her voice coming out quieter than she'd intended and softer. "Here in the inn, or here in general?" he asked without looking up. "Both," he considered. The fire shifted, sending a single bright spark upward that vanished before it reached the mantle. "I came to the crossing the way you did," he said, "at the end of a long road. It was was winter when I arrived. The stream was frozen. The lane was white. The blossoms on the hedges had long since gone. I thought I'd stay one night. He paused, and something like the memory of mild surprise crossed his face. That was a long time ago. You stayed, she said. The inn needed a warden, he said simply. It was a reasonable arrangement. She looked around the room again, seeing it with slightly rested eyes. Eyes that had had even those few minutes of soft drifting and were better for it. The details she hadn't registered before came into focus. A row of small clay pots on the windowsill, each holding a dried stem of something different: seed heads, feathery grasses, a single white dried bloom she couldn't name, a collection of smooth stones on the mantelpiece, each one a different shade of gray, a wooden shelf of narrow books along the far wall, their spines turned inward so you couldn't read the titles. What are those? She asked, nodding toward the books. Stories, he said. All the guests leave one. Leave one, whatever they were carrying when they arrived. He set his own book aside on the arm of his chair. Not a written story, necessarily. Just whatever it was that brought them here. Whatever was too heavy to carry any further that night. They leave it in one of those volumes, and then they sleep, and in the morning they go on, and they're lighter. Maren regarded the shelf. There were more books than she'd first thought. The shelf was deeper than it appeared. The volumes stacked in 2 quiet rows, and some of them were so old that their cloth spines had bleached to a pale gray, indistinguishable from the ones beside them. They were intimate objects. They had the heft of things that had absorbed something real. Do you read them? She asked. No, he said. And then, after a moment, they're not for reading. They're for keeping. There's a difference. She understood this, though she could not have explained how. Some things didn't need to be revisited to be honored. Some things only needed to be set down somewhere safe. Are you hungry? The warden asked, shifting only slightly in his chair, a gentle transition, nothing abrupt. She was, she realized, quietly hungry, the way you are after a long time of not noticing. A little, she said. He stood with the ease of a person whose joints have made peace with age and rose without urgency. He moved to a low side table she hadn't noticed in the corner dark wood narrow, a thick cloth over it of woven cream and rust. He lifted the cloth, and there were things beneath: a covered bowl, a small round loaf, a shallow dish of golden oil with a sprig of something green floating in it, a single white cup already filled, from which a thin coil of steam was rising. "I don't know how you knew I was coming," she said. He smiled, the first full smile she'd seen from him, unhurried, real. "The crossing knows," he said. "I only prepare." He brought the cup to her first. She held it in both hands and found it exactly warm enough, not scalding, not cooling, but at the particular temperature of something tended with care. She sipped and tasted something mild, faintly sweet, somewhere between tea and warm honey water. It settled in her chest like a slow breath. He returned to his own chair. The fire had found a new arrangement in its embers, and the room was a degree warmer than before, though the light was a degree dimmer, and the two changes balanced perfectly. The amber lamp between them threw a slow, honey-toned circle on the low ceiling, and the clock without hands above the mantel kept its perfect, unhurried silence. Maren held her cup. She looked at the row of books turned inward on their shelf and thought about all the things that had been left inside them, all the weights that had been set down in this room, in this warmth, by people who had arrived at the end of their particular roads and found this place waiting. She breathed in. She breathed out. The inn settled quietly around her, the way a good place always does when it recognizes you have decided to stay. Later, she had stopped tracking time precisely, which felt appropriate. The warden showed her up the stairs. They were narrow stairs, as stairs in old stone buildings tend to be, with a rope rail worn smooth along its full length, and each step a slightly different height from the one before, as though the original builder had been improvising improvising as he went. They did not creak, or rather, they made a sound more like the settling of an old voice than a creak, something low and accommodating, the sound of wood that has carried many footsteps and carries them easily now. The corridor at the top was dim, lit by 2 small oil lamps in niches cut into the stone at either end. Their flames were turned very low, producing less light than warmth, and the corridor was close and quiet in a way that felt protective rather than confined. There were 3 doors on each side, all of them closed, all of them painted the same color, a blue so dark it was almost black, the blue of deep water, or a sky just after the last light has gone. The room at the end, the warden said, gesturing toward the last door on the right. It looks toward the garden. He handed her a small lamp, another of the amber glass ones, the same warm color as the ones downstairs, and she took it with both hands, careful with its light. "Sleep well," he said. It wasn't a wish exactly. It was a statement offered with the gentle certainty of someone who had seen this many times and knew the outcome. She walked to the end of the corridor and opened the door. The room was small, as she'd expected. The low ceiling, the deep-set window with its stone sill just wide enough to sit on, the plank floor with a narrow rug of deep rust and cream, a bed against the inside wall, not wide, not narrow, with a low iron headboard and a coverlet of heavy gray linen. And beneath the coverlet, she could already see more blankets folded at the foot, soft things, layered things, things for someone who liked the particular comfort of being gently weighted. She set her lamp on the small table beside the bed and looked out the window. The garden was there, as the warden had said. It was a walled garden, stone walls on 3 sides, the inn making the 4th. And inside those walls, in the soft blue light of what she now realized, was an extremely full moon just visible above the left-hand wall. She could see the shapes of growing things, not the sharp, formal shapes of a designed garden. These were the rounder shapes of a garden that grows as it pleases, that has been tended with care, but without insistence. Clumps of tall grasses, the arching canes of what might be roses in another season, a single small tree in the center, whose branches were bare and horizontal, reaching outward in gentle, symmetrical gestures like a person standing still with arms out. There was a stone path through it. She could see that much. And at the far end of the path, just before the back wall, a low wooden bench with the particular silvery quality of weathered things that have spent many seasons in the open air and are the better for it. On the bench, moonlight. The moonlight was the simple, clean white blue of a full moon at its height, and it fell on the bench and the path and the flat tops of the stone walls, as though it had been placed there deliberately, as though someone had designed the garden to receive it exactly this way on exactly this night. Maren rested her forehead against the cool glass of the window for a moment. She thought distantly of all the things that waited for her at the end of this, the unread messages, the undone tasks, the decisions deferred, the ordinary accumulation of a life in motion. She thought of them the way you think of things that are very far away, acknowledging their existence without feeling their weight. They were there. They would be there. But they were outside the crossing, outside the lane and the white blossoms and the signpost with its wan letters. In here, there was only the garden and the moonlight, and the blankets folded at the foot of the bed. She turned from the window. The room had a smell faint, clean of old linen and beeswax, and something green, like crushed stems or fresh herbs from the garden below. She breathed it in and felt her shoulders lower by a degree. It was the kind of smell that did something to the nervous system directly, before the thinking part of the brain could have an opinion about it. The body just responded. She sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was deep and gave slowly, evenly, and she placed her palm flat on the coverlet for a moment and felt the texture of the linen, a slight roughness, not unpleasant, the realness of a fabric that had been washed many times and dried in open air. She liked this kind of roughness. It meant something had been used and cared for. It meant someone had thought about the person who would sleep here. She unlaced her shoes and set them side by side beneath the small table. She reached over and turned the wick of her lamp down by 3 careful increments until the room was held in a dim amber glow, just enough light to see by and no more. The garden through the window was a blue-silver world now, and the moon had risen just enough that she could see its full face above the wall, round, unhurried, completely indifferent to time. She pulled the coverlet back. She lay down. She pulled the blankets up one by one and felt each layer settle over her, felt the particular comfort of the weight of them, the warmth building slowly from within them. She turned once, gently, to face the window and its square of moonlit garden, and she breathed out, long, slow, complete. She did not fall asleep all at once. She fell into the near sleep, that comfortable territory just short of unconsciousness, where the body rests fully, but the mind still moves slowly between thoughts that come and go without snagging. She had not been in this place for a long time. She had usually been too restless to find it, had moved past it, or skipped over it, or startled herself awake from it, too accustomed to the vigilance of ordinary evenings. But the room held her softly. The walls held her. The weight of the blankets held her. She thought about the books turned inward on the shelf downstairs and wondered what was in them. Not from curiosity, particularly, more from the kind of idle, unhurried wondering that happens on the edge of sleep, when the mind produces questions without any particular urgency attached. What had people left here? She thought about what she might leave. The word she'd been circling for months without landing on. The word for the particular exhaustion she'd been carrying, which wasn't unhappiness exactly, and wasn't quite loneliness, but but was something in between, some private fatigue. She thought she might write it here. She thought that if she were being honest, the word was simply this: effort. Not too much effort, not too little, just the unrelieved effort of trying to be adequate to every hour as it arrived, without pause, without the grace of a moment when nothing was required. She breathed in, she breathed out. The effort, she thought, could wait outside. It could stand in the lane with the white blossoms and wait. Below her, through the flaw, she heard the soft sound of the inn settling, a low, woody accommodation, the building making its nightly adjustments, and beneath that, further below, she thought she could just hear the fire, still breathing in its slow, consistent way, still tending itself. She looked at the garden. The moon had moved only slightly, as the moon does when you watch it patiently, and the light on the stone path had shifted with it, widening in one place and narrowing in another. The small bare tree at the center of the garden was entirely in moonlight now, and its branches were precise and dark against the silver sky, each one distinct, each one still. She thought, I know this tree. Not literally. She had never been in this garden, never seen this tree, but she recognized the quality of it, the quality of a thing that has been where it is for long enough that it belongs there completely, that has no argument with its situation, that spreads and reaches and rests within itself without needing anything to be different. She had been hoping for a long time to feel that. She was feeling something close to it now. Not arrival exactly, not resolution, but a loosening, as though the question she'd been holding had not been answered, but had, for now, been gently set aside, as though she did not need to know the answer tonight. The lamp beside her bed was barely aglow now, a soft, ember-like warmth rather than a light, and the room was more blue than amber, more moonlit than firelit, and the blue felt good. Blue was the color of this particular kind of quiet. She closed her eyes fully, In the darkness behind them, she saw the amber of the lamp still, the way you see a light after you've looked at it directly, its shape and warmth persisting in the eye's memory. And then that too faded very slowly, and there was only the dark. The dark was not empty. It was the kind of full, dense dark that comes from a truly quiet place, a dark with texture, almost as though the night itself had volume. She lay in it without resistance. Her breathing slowed, slow enough that she noticed the spaces between the breaths, the brief, complete rest between each exhale and the next inhale. That small gap of nothing that she had always before rushed past without permission. She stayed in it now, or rather, she let herself be in it, which was different from staying, which implied effort. She did not know later at what exact moment the garden outside the window and the dark inside her eyelids became the same place. She only knew that at some point the tree was in both, its bare branches precise and patient, reaching in all directions without preference, standing in moonlight that was also somehow interior, that was also somehow the particular quality of silence she had found in the chair downstairs when she had looked at the fire. She dreamed. She would think later, though she wasn't sure it was dreaming exactly. It was more like being told something without words, some quiet, uncomplicated truth about rest, about the value of allowing things to be enough, about the garden waiting patiently outside windows while the people inside them sleep. She would not remember it clearly in the morning, but she would remember the feeling of it, the feeling of something small and important and long overdue, the feeling of laying something down. Outside, the moon continued its indifferent arc. The fire in the common room below burned low and steady, tended by no one in particular now, but tending itself, as fires in old inns sometimes learn to do. The warden sat in his chair with his book open and his eyes closed and his breath slow, and even the way it was every night, not quite asleep, not quite awake, simply present in the particular way the inn required of him. And Maren slept deeply, fully, without effort. Morning in the inn came without insistence. There was no hard light. The window faced east toward the garden, and the sun, when it arrived, was young and diffuse, the kind of early morning light that touches things rather than strikes them. It moved across the coverlet in a slow, pale gradient, and Maren became aware of it gradually, as though it had been waiting for her to notice. She lay still for a long moment, not immediately reaching for the requirements of the day. She let herself be aware of the weight of the blankets, still good, still warm. The texture of the pillow against her face, cool linen on the outer edge, warm where she had been. The low sound of the garden through the glass, birds, not many, not insistent. A single sequence of notes repeated at long intervals, as though the bird were trying a phrase and then thinking about it before trying it again. She had slept without waking once. She could not remember the last time this had happened. She dressed without hurry and went to the window. The garden in morning was a different thing from the garden by moonlight, warmer in color. The stone walls holding a faint gold where the new light touched them. The path visible now as dark gray against the paler gray of the surrounding earth. The small bare tree was no longer silver, but brown, a deep and honest brown. And she could see now that its bark had a pattern she hadn't been able to make out in the dark, a spiral quality, as though the tree had grown turning slowly, recording its own process. She went down. The staircase in daylight was narrower than it had seemed the night before, or perhaps simply more particular. Each small difference in the step heights easier to feel now, as though she were paying more attention to the reality of things. The rope rail was rough under her fingers. She noted it without complaint. The common room was changed by morning light as well. The candles on the long table were extinguished, all of them, and in their place, morning came through a window she hadn't noticed the night before, set high in the east-facing wall above the bookshelf. It was a small window, leaded glass in a simple pattern, and the light coming through it was greenish and warm, the color of light through leaves. The fire in the hearth was low, but present. A couple of unhurried flames above a solid bed of dark coals. The warden was in the kitchen. She heard him before she saw him. The quiet sounds of movement, the small percussion of preparation. She followed the sounds to a low doorway at the back of the common room, through which she found a kitchen that was exactly the kitchen this inn should have had. Deep stone sink, wooden counters pale with flour, a wide range of old iron, copper pots of varying sizes on hooks above it. 2 windows looked out onto the side wall of the garden, and through them came the same diffuse morning light, catching the copper pots and making them glow. The warden stood at the range. He turned when she entered, not startled, simply turning, and greeted her with a nod that contained everything a good morning needed and nothing it didn't. "Sit," he said, indicating a low wooden bench beside the kitchen table. She sat. The kitchen table was old and round, scarred with the marks of long use, and someone, the warden, she supposed, had set it. 2 thick pottery mugs, a small jug of something steaming, a bod with bread already cut, a low dish of dark, preserved the color of garnets. The surface of the preserve caught the light and held it. "Plum," he said, following her gaze. "From the tree in the garden. It gives fruit in late summer, only a little, but reliably. Every year, the small tree in the center asked." He nodded, turning back to the range, adjusting something without particular attention. "It has been here longer than the inn, I think. Longer than I have, certainly." She poured from the jug the same warm, mild tea as the night before, or something like it, and wrapped her hands around the mug. The kitchen was warm in the specific way of a room where something has been cooking for hours, a warmth that permeates rather than sits on the surface. "You slept," he said, a statement. I did, she said. He brought 2 small bowls to the table and sat across from her. And for a time, they simply ate in the kitchen with the morning light on the copper pots, and the birds continuing their intermittent conversation in the garden. She ate slowly, without thinking about what came next. She tasted the bread, which was dense and faintly sweet, and the preserve, which was taut and rich and tasted, she thought, of something further back than memory, some earlier, simpler version of sweetness. You should see the garden properly, the warden said when they had eaten. In daylight, the morning is the best time, before it warms up and the light changes. He stood and carried his bowl to the sink. The gate in the east wall opens from the inside. The latch is stiff, but it yields if you lift as you press. He said it the way he said most things, as information, offered without attachment to whether she would use it. She found this restful, this quality in him of presenting things without urging them. She finished her tea. She set her mug on the table and stood up in the warm kitchen and heard the birds more clearly now. A low background of morning sound, and felt the day opening ahead of her, not as a list of things to accomplish, but simply as time, unhurried, unqualified, hers. She went to find the garden gate. The gate was where he said it would be, set into the east wall, narrow and low. The wood aged to the same gray as the stone around it, so that you might miss it if you weren't looking. The latch was indeed stiff, cold iron beneath her fingers, but it yielded with a short, clean sound when she lifted and pressed together, and the gate swung inward smoothly, as though it had been recently oiled by someone who cared about such things being easy. She stepped through into the garden. The morning smell of it reached her immediately. Earth and cold stone, and something living and green. Some undertone of growth that was present even in a garden that was mostly bare this time of year. She walked forward onto the path and turned slowly to take it in properly, with fresh eyes and the quiet mind she'd woken with. The walls were taller from inside than they'd appeared from the window, the east wall especially, so that the garden felt genuinely enclosed, genuinely its own world. The stone of the walls was old limestone, and it held the nights cold still. She could feel it from several feet away. But the path itself, dark stone that had absorbed yesterday's thin warmth, was slightly warmer underfoot. She walked along the path slowly. On either side, the beds were in their winter state, not dead exactly, but withheld. She could see the dark stakes of what would be tall things in summer, the thick canes of established roses, tied back loosely to wire along the inner wall, a row of something low and evergreen, clipped to rounded shapes like the tops of small, self-satisfied animals. At the base of the wall, pressed against the cold stone, small green rosettes of plants she couldn't name, their centers tightly furled against the season. She liked this, the garden in its waiting form. It asked nothing of her. At the center of the garden, the plum tree. She stood beneath it and looked up through its branches. They were extraordinary close up, each branch a record, as she'd thought from the window, of the tree's own turning. The bark was smooth in places and rough in others. The roughness where the tree had healed itself over time, the smooth places where nothing had needed healing. She put her palm flat against the trunk and felt the texture of it, cool, complex, entirely itself. A single small dried fruit still clung to one of the upper branches. She could see it from beneath, dark, wizened, reduced to a tight, dense thing. It had not fallen. It had simply stayed past its season, past its purpose, into this bare, clear morning. She found this quietly remarkable. She sat on the weathered bench at the end of the path. The moonlight that had been on it the night before was long gone. Now it held the thin, honest light of a winter morning, and the bench was cold through her clothes. But she sat on it anyway. She sat on it and looked back at the inn from the outside which she hadn't seen properly since arriving the night before. It was beautiful, not dramatically, not in the way that announces itself. It was beautiful in the manner of things that have been made well and used well, and are therefore in a state of complete rightness. The stone was the gray of aged limestone, touched with lichen in the sheltered corners. The slate roof was dark and layered, each tile slightly uneven in a way that made the whole more pleasing than any perfectly uniform surface would have been. In one of the upstairs windows, her window, she realized the glass had a slight imperfection that caught the morning light and held a small prism of color. She had stayed here for less than a night and a morning, and she already felt a quality of attachment to it that was unusual and real. The gate in the east wall was still open behind her. Through it, she could see the lane, the pale gravel, and at the lane's end, the bridge and the dark shapes of the oaks beyond. Beyond those, somewhere, her car and the road, and all the ordinary geography of her ordinary life. She did not feel ready to move toward it yet. She felt ready only to sit for a while longer on this bench in this cold garden, beneath this sky that was pale blue and cloudless, watching the small dried fruit on its branch not fall. After a time, she didn't know how long, she had genuinely stopped tracking it, which was itself a small and welcome recovery. She heard the gate open more fully behind her, and the sound of footsteps on the path. Slow, unhurried footsteps. She didn't turn. The warden sat down on the bench beside her. He had brought his waistcoat against the cold, but no coat. And she thought that he probably didn't feel the cold the way most people did. Or perhaps he had simply made a long peace with it. The way you make peace with anything you live alongside long enough. They sat without speaking for a while. The garden made its quiet sounds. A branch moving somewhere high on the inn's roof. A bird landing briefly on the wall and then departing. The faint, distant sound of the stream that ran under the bridge at the crossing. audible only because everything else was so still. "I should leave today," Maren said, not with sadness exactly, with a kind of measured acknowledgement. "When you're ready," the warden said. She nodded. "Is there always someone here?" she asked. "Does someone always stay?" He looked at the garden, considering. A small smile at the corner of his mouth, not amused, only thoughtful. "Not always the same person," he said, "but the inn is never quite empty." She thought about this, about the books turned inward on the shelf, about the chair by the fire that still held the shape of her, about the plum tree and its one remaining dried fruit, and she felt something settle in her, quietly and completely, that she couldn't quite name. She decided she didn't need to. She went inside to collect the few things she'd set down, her jacket, her keys, the small notebook she always carried in her pocket and rarely wrote in. She found them where she'd left them. The jacket on the hook by the door, the notebook on the edge of the table where the candles had burned all night, the keys she had to look for, and eventually found on the stone sill of the downstairs window, beside the clay pots with their dried stems. She stood with her things in her hands and looked at the common room one final time. It looked, in daylight, slightly different from how it had looked in candlelight, smaller, more particular, more honest. The mismatched chairs were more clearly mismatched, the worn places on the floor more visible. The clock without hands above the mantel was a simpler thing in morning light than it had been by firelight, just old carved wood, just a still bird at its center. And yet she felt no disenchantment at this. If anything, she liked it more. She liked that it was real. The warden came in from the garden a few minutes after she did and stood near the fire, which he fed a single piece of split wood with the ease of long habit. "Before you go," he said, "there's something I'd like to show you." He moved to the shelf of inward-turned books. She had been aware of them all morning, had given them small, sidelong glances as she moved around the room, the way you are aware of something you intend to think about properly, but haven't yet. The books were more varied than she'd initially understood. Some were thin, some thick, some cloth-bound, some leather, and their sizes ranged from barely larger than a playing card to the size of a proper journal. The oldest ones she could see now had spines that were not merely faded, but nearly gone, the cloth threads visible beneath. He didn't take one from the shelf. Instead, he pointed to the end of the row, the far right, where the most recent books stood. The newest was small and square, its cover a pale sage green, its spine turned in like all the others. "There's room," he said simply. She looked at it. She looked at the blank-spined book beside it. Sage green, waiting, set apart by about an inch from its nearest neighbor. She understood. She sat down in the chair she had occupied the night before, the smaller one, with its woven blanket now folded neatly over the arm. The warden brought a pen from the small table, an old-fashioned one, the kind you had to press rather than click, and the sage green book, which he opened to its first page and set in her lap. He then sat in his own chair and opened his own book and said nothing further. She sat with the blank first page in her lap for a long moment. She thought about the words she had found the night before, in the loose, careful thinking of near sleep. Effort, the unrelieved effort of trying to be adequate to every hour. She thought about writing it down, but in the daylight of the common room, with the morning birds outside and the fire newly fed, it felt less like a wound than like a fact, a true fact and a manageable one. She wrote it anyway, not dramatically. She simply wrote, "I have been very tired for a long time, and I think I had forgotten that this was allowed to be true. And then, I am glad I found this place." She closed the book. She set the pen on the arm of the chair. The warden stood and took the book without ceremony and returned it to its place on the shelf, spine inward, set beside the others. He straightened it slightly so it sat flush with its neighbors, and then he returned to his chair nothing had changed in the room. The fire was the same fire. The lamp on the table was unlit now in the daylight. The clock without hands kept its patient non-record of the hour. But something had shifted in Maren, something small and specific and real. She had set it down, whatever it was, the weight of an unnamed exhaustion, the private document of how tired she had been. She had set it down in a small sage green book on a shelf of books, in an inn on the other side of a crossing that only appeared at the end of long days, and it would be kept there, and she would go on without it. She looked at the warden. "Thank you," she said. He inclined his head, not dismissive, not modest, just receiving the thanks in the spirit in which it was offered. "The blossoms on the lane," he said, "will be open properly in spring. Fully open. They smell of something that doesn't have a name." She smiled at this. "I'll come back in spring," she said. He looked at her with his gray eyes and his expression of complete, uncomplicated calm, and he said, "I know." She picked up her jacket and her keys and her notebook and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle, not from hesitation, but from the desire to hold the moment just a half second longer, to finish it properly rather than merely ending it. The fire behind her, the books on the shelf, the clock without hands, the warmth. She opened the door. The morning air outside was cool and honest and smelled of gravel and the sleeping hedges and far away smoke and the cold breath of the stream. The lane was pale in the morning light, the hedge blossoms still mostly closed, a faint white row of almost opening along each side. She walked down the 2 stone steps. She crossed the lane. Spring came to Vellmoor Crossing gradually, the way it came to old and patient places, not as an announcement, but as an accumulation, a degree more warmth in the morning air, a slight change in the quality of the light, the particular luminous quality of early spring light that is different from winter light in ways that are difficult to describe precisely, but immediately felt a new green at the base of the hedge along the lane, so fresh and clear a color it almost ached. Maren came back on a Saturday. The road was the same road, and the left turn was the same left turn. But the drive through the spring landscape was something different from the autumn drive. Everything further along, further open. The trees outside the oaks in young leaf, the fields between them showing the bright, almost implausible green of new grass. She drove with the window down again, and the air this time was cool and sweet, and carried the distant smell of earth just warming. The crossing came into view around the same gentle curve. The stream was louder. The season had filled it, and she could hear it from the car this time. A fuller, more confident sound, still patient, but with more water to carry. The signpost was the same, perhaps slightly more worn at its letters than she remembered, though she may have imagined this. She parked and walked across the bridge. The hedges on the lane were entirely transformed. The Warden had been right. The blossoms were fully open. They were small and white, as they had been in bud, but open now into four-petaled flowers with yellow centers, and they lined the lane so densely that walking between them was like walking between two continuous garlands. The fragrance was exactly as he'd described, something without a name, something that occupied the space between floral and green, between sweet and cool, between a smell you recognized and one you had never encountered before. She walked slowly. She wanted to hold this in full, the smell, the sound of the stream still audible behind her, the pale gravel of the lane underfoot, the particular quality of the morning around her. The inn appeared at the end of the lane, and it too was different in spring. The lichen on the north-facing walls had taken on a brighter shade, vivid green-gray against the stone. Colonies of it she hadn't noticed in the dimmer autumn light. The climbing plant on the east wall, which in autumn had been bare twisted stems, was now fully in leaf, a dense, dark green coverage that softened the stone with something alive. And the door was already open. Not wide open, just ajar, the way you leave a door when you are expecting someone and want them to know they can come straight in. She climbed the 2 steps and pushed it open gently and stepped into the common room. The inn in spring was the same inn, and not the same inn. The same mismatched chairs, the same long table with its candles, unlit in the morning as before, the same clock without hands above the mantel, with its small carved bird. But the light was different. The high east window that had shown green gold winter light was now the carrier of a more confident morning brightness, and the room was lighter and warmer toned. The colors of the wood and the cushions more vivid, as though the season had turned up a dial somewhere. The fire was unlit. In its place on the hearth, a large arrangement of cut branches, the kind with catkins, long silver gray things, brought in from somewhere and arranged with the same care the Warden applied to everything. He came from the kitchen before she had finished looking around. He was the same, exactly the same, she noted with quiet relief. The same silver hair, the same gray eyes, the same dark moss waistcoat over linen, the same quality of unhurried presence. She had half expected to find him changed by the season, the way the building was. But he was simply himself, and the sight of him steady and unchanged was its own form of comfort. "You came back," he said. "I said I would," she answered. He smiled, the full smile, the one she remembered. "The garden is worth seeing this morning," he said. She set down her jacket and followed him through the common room and through the kitchen and out the low back door she hadn't used before, not the gate in the east wall, but a door directly from the kitchen into the garden, a route that bypassed the formality of the outside approach. The garden in spring was a different world entirely. The canes of the roses were newly leafed, small dark green shapes emerging along each stem, and in the beds along the wall, the things that had been furled in tight rosettes all winter were now upright and reaching. She could see now that they were foxgloves, dozens of them, their tall spires still in bud, the tallest already at her shoulder height. But the plum tree was the revelation. It had blossomed. It stood in the center of the garden exactly as before, same branches, same spiral bark, same horizontal reach. But now every branch was covered in small white flowers, so densely that the branch structure beneath was barely visible, and the flowers moved together in the gentle morning air with a slow, collective tremor, a breathing quality. The single dried fruit she had seen from beneath in autumn was gone. She looked for it and couldn't find it, absorbed now into the tree's general abundance. The blossoms had a fragrance, clean, faintly sweet, specifically plum, distinguishable from the hedge blossoms, though related to them, the way a voice is related to an echo. She stood beneath it and looked up through the white cloud of it and felt in her chest a widening, a specific opening, something that had been waiting, she understood now, since the autumn. She breathed it in, and the morning held her gently in its cool spring light. The Warden had planted something new along the south wall of the garden. She noticed low, mounding plants with silvery gray leaves that she recognized eventually as lavender, not yet in bloom but well established, suggesting they had been put in earlier in the season and had spent the weeks since quietly taking hold. They were arranged in a long, loose row, the color of them a soft silver against the limestone wall. And she thought that in summer, when they flowered, the bees would find them. She walked the full perimeter of the garden for the first time. The path went around the inside of the walls in a loop she hadn't known about. It connected to the central path near the tree, but also ran the edges, hugging the base of the walls. And on this outer path, things grew that she hadn't seen from the center. A low wooden trellis against the north wall, with the beginnings of something climbing it. A patch of mint crushed underfoot, with a clean, sharp fragrance. A single old ceramic pot holding what appeared to be a primrose, yellow. The sharp yellow of early spring, the most entirely itself color she could think of. She crouched beside the primrose pot. The flowers were small and exact, each one a perfect 5-pointed star, yellow as old gold, with a small green eye. She looked at them closely, the way you look at small things that repay looking, that reveal more structure and more color the longer you attend to them. The stems were furry with fine, as she could see when the low light hit them from an angle. The leaves were a deep, wrinkled green. "Did you plant this?" she called to the warden, who was at the other end of the garden, doing something unhurried with the climbing plant on the east wall. "It was here when I arrived," he said. "It comes back every year." She stood up. She thought of how many springs that represented, how many returns of this particular yellow, this particular exact yellow, in the corner of this walled garden. She thought of all the people who might have crouched here and looked at it over the years and felt what she was feeling now. Some long, quiet chain of attention ending here with her in the cool morning light, with the white blossomed tree nearby and the new lavender holding silver against the limestone. She went back inside eventually, and they sat together at the kitchen table as they had in autumn, the same round table, the same 2 mugs, the same jug of warming tea. The morning light through the kitchen windows was stronger than it had been in the cold season, and the copper pots glowed accordingly. The reflections on the ceiling deeper and warmer. The warden pawed. She had brought something with her this time. She hadn't planned to exactly, but on the drive this morning, she had stopped at a small market and found a small jar of local honey, dark and dense, the kind pressed by someone who kept bees on flowering hillsides. She set it on the table between them. He looked at it, and and something in his expression acknowledged the gesture without making too much of it. "For the tea," she said. He opened it and stirred a small amount into her cup, and then into his own, and the tea took on a new quality, still mild, still warm, but with the honey adding something deeper and older, a sweetness that tasted of flowers rather than sugar. They sat in the spring morning. She thought about the books on the shelf in the common room, and the thing she had written in the autumn. She thought about whether it still applied, whether she was still that tired, that quietly overburdened with the ongoing effort of everything. She examined this honestly. She was still tired sometimes. She still had weeks when the weight of the ordinary accumulated in ways she could feel, but not entirely address. But there was something different in how she held it now. Something she had found in this room on that first night. Some knowledge that it was possible to set things down, if only for a night, if only long enough to sleep without them. Something that had stayed with her, that had worked in her over the months between autumn and now, quietly, like a seed. She looked at the warden. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what you said about the inn never being quite empty, about different people coming, but always someone." He waited. "Who came in winter?" she asked. He considered this in the way he considered most things unhurried, giving the question its due. "A man who had carried a decision too long," he said, "and needed one night to let it be unmade. A woman who had not slept in 3 weeks." He paused. "A girl young, not quite grown, who had taken a wrong turn on a walk and somehow found the crossing. She stayed one evening and ate everything I put in front of her and slept in the chair by the fire. Her parents found her in the morning, worried nearly to nothing. She couldn't quite explain where she'd been." Maren smiled. "Does she know," she asked, "any of them, that it's real?" He looked at his cup. "Real enough. Real in the way things that help you are real, the way sleep is real, the way the particular piece of certain rooms is real. It doesn't need to be explained to be used." she thought about this. She drank her tea. Outside the kitchen window, the foxgloves in the garden stood in their tall, patient rows and held their buds and waited for the season to advance, which it would, which it always did. She was glad she had come back. She was glad there was somewhere to come back to. She stayed longer this time. There was no plan to do so. She had not packed a bag, had not told anyone where she was going in the loose, instinctive way she'd driven here this morning. But the afternoon arrived quietly, and then the afternoon kept going, and the light through the inn's windows shifted from morning gold to afternoon copper to the beginning of the honey dusk she had known on her first visit, and she found she had no urgency to move through any of it. The warden did not ask if she was staying. He simply, at some point in the late afternoon, went up the staircase and came back down and said, with his ordinary equanimity, "Your room is ready." She had not imagined it would be the same room, but it was. The same low ceiling, the same stone windowsill, the coverlet this time a cream color rather than gray, the blankets folded at the foot in the same invitation, the window that looked toward the garden held a different garden now. White blossoms of the plum tree visible, even from this angle in the last of the light, glowing faintly. The foxglove spires dark sentinels along the walls. She sat on the edge of the bed as she had in autumn. She found the lamp, same amber glass, same gentle wick, and lit it with the matches on the table, and sat in the warm, small light of it, while the garden went slowly blue outside the window. She was thinking about the shelf of books, not anxiously, with the calm, gradual quality of thought that this place seemed to allow ideas coming forward slowly, one at a time, without crowding. She thought about what she might write this time, if she wrote anything. She thought about whether there was something new to set down, or whether this visit was different. Less about setting something down, and more about simply being somewhere she wanted to be. She thought it might be both, she thought the inn might accommodate both equally well. She went back down when the light had fully gone, and the common room was lit again. All the candles on the long table, the fire, the amber lamp between the two chairs, the small niches in the walls with their votives. She had seen this room in 3 different lights now. The first startled amber of her first arrival, the honest daylight of the morning after, the confident spring morning, and this 4th version, the spring evening candlelight, was perhaps the most beautiful. Everything in it was warm. The warden was in his chair. She took hers. For a long time, they simply sat together in the firelit room, and the silence between them was the kind of silence that has been built out of genuine ease, not the silence of 2 people who have nothing to say, but the silence of 2 people who have said enough and are content to be without saying more. She had very few silences like this in her life outside this place. Most of the silences in her ordinary life were silences someone was about to fill. The warden reached across to the small table, and from a low drawer she hadn't noticed, he produced a small wooden object and placed it between them on the table. She looked at it. It was a carved bird, identical or nearly so to the one at the center of the clock face above the mantel. Same species, or what she thought was the same species, something small and common and precise. Its wings were folded as on the clock. Its head was turned slightly to one side, the way a resting bird's head will turn, with one eye toward the light. "I made that," he said, "the winter I arrived here. The first winter. I had a great deal of time and very little else to do, and so I carved it. And then you put it on the clock. After a while," he said, "after I understood what the clock was measuring." She picked up the small bird carefully. It was warm from the drawer, warmer than wood should be, she thought, or perhaps just warm from proximity to the fire. The carving was finer than she'd expected. The individual feathers on the wings were suggested in low relief, each line a slow, careful thing. "I'd like you to have it," he said. She looked at him. "You've come twice now," he said. "That means you know the way. It means you can always find it when you need it. But it's useful to have something, I think, something you can hold in an ordinary hour, in an ordinary room, and remember that this exists." She closed her hand around the bird. It was small enough to fit entirely in her palm. She felt the carved feathers against her fingers, the smooth dome of the head, the slight asymmetry where the head turned, the turn toward the light. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once and returned to his book. She sat with the bird in her closed hand and looked at the fire and felt the room around her, felt it with a fullness she hadn't expected, a richness of detail. The way the candlelight on the long table made each flame a slightly different height. The way the rug before the fireplace had been worn to a soft sheen directly in front of the hearth, where countless feet had stood to warm themselves. The smell of the spring night coming in faintly under the door, cool and grassed, and faintly, the white blossoms. She was somewhere she wanted to be. She was not anxious about where she would be next. She looked up at the clock without hands and the small carved bird at its center, and thought about all the hours she had spent trying to keep track of everything, every obligation, every approximation of adequacy. She let them go, one at a time, in the warmth, before she left in the morning. After the tea and the bread and the dark preserve, after the kitchen window's gold light on the copper pots, after the garden one last time in the sharp sweetness of a spring morning, she wrote in the small sage green book. The warden brought it to her without being asked. He brought it and set it on the arm of her chair and placed the pen beside it, and then sat in his own chair and looked at his own book and gave her what she needed, which was simply the unhurried time. She wrote more than she had the first time. She wrote about the plum tree in blossom. She wrote about the primrose in the ceramic pot in the corner of the garden. Its exact and generous yellow. She wrote about the silence between two people who have nothing left to prove to each other. She wrote, "I think I came here the first time because I was too tired to go on without stopping. I think I came back because I wanted to bring myself somewhere worth being." She closed the book. The warden set it on the shelf, spine inward, in its place among the others. She looked at the shelf for a long moment. All those volumes, all those inward spines, all those things left here for keeping. She thought about the girl who had stayed in the chair by the fire in winter, and the man who had needed one night to unmake a decision he'd held too long, and all the others she'd never know about. All the people who had found the crossing at the end of a long day and walked down the lane between the hedge blossoms and climbed the 2 steps to the door. All the people who had slept here. She stood up and pulled on her jacket and put the small carved bird in her jacket pocket where her fingers could find it without looking. The warden walked her to the door. The morning outside was exactly what she'd hoped. Clear, cool, the sky a pale and particular blue, the kind of blue that holds the promise of warmth later without overcommitting. The lane between the hedges was fully blossomed, the nameless fragrance of it meeting her as she stepped out. And she stood on the stone step for a moment and breathed it in deliberately. "Will you be all right?" the warden asked from the doorway. It was the first time he had asked her anything of this kind, and she thought about it seriously before answering. "Yes," she said, "I think I will." He nodded. He seemed satisfied, not relieved, which would have implied he had been worried, but satisfied, which was different. The satisfaction of someone who has done what they intended to do. She walked down the lane. The blossoms were at the height of their openness this morning. Each small 4-petaled flower, fully extended, turned toward the pale light. She walked slowly between them and let her hands brush the tops of the hedge on either side, feeling the softness of the flowers, the slight give of the small stems. The fragrance moved with her. She thought she would remember this walk for a long time. This particular combination of morning light and cool air, and the softness of blossoms under the hands. And she was right. She would. At the bridge, she stopped. The stream below was fuller than it had been in autumn, the water moving at an easy, confident pace over the pale oval pebbles. The sound it made was different from the quieter autumn sound, more present, more its own. The sound of water that had been replenished and was carrying itself forward without effort. She watched it for a while. She found she could watch moving water for a very long time now, in a way she couldn't have managed before. The restlessness that had once made stillness feel like a form of failure had quieted. She crossed the bridge. At the signpost, she paused. Vellmoor Crossing. All who arrive here are welcome to rest. She read it once, and then once more, and felt as she had on her first reading of it, that gentle loosening behind the sternum, that small, specific release. She walked to her car. She sat for a moment before starting the engine, her hand in her pocket, her fingers around the small carved bird. The carved feathers, the smooth dome of the head, the slight asymmetry of the turn toward light. She held it and felt the warmth of it, warmer than it should have been, carried close to her through the cool morning. And she thought about all the ordinary hours ahead of her, the ordinary rooms, the ordinary days, the ordinary requirement of being adequate to each thing as it arrived. She thought, I can do that. She thought, and when I can't, I know where to go. She started the engine. The road back through the hills was the same road through the same hills, and the spring was further along than she remembered. The roadside verges thick with cow parsley, the trees fully leafed, the light coming through them in the particular shifting way of light through leaves in motion. She drove without hurry, the windows open, the air moving moving through the car. In her jacket pocket, the small bird. Not a key exactly. Not a map. Something more intimate than either. A reminder held in the hand of what it felt like to rest without condition. To be received. To find a place that expected nothing and offered everything. To sleep in the weight of good blankets while a walled garden waited outside the window, patient and full of things returning. She breathed. The hills held her on either side, and ahead of her the road continued its slow and generous unfolding into an ordinary day made softly, permanently different. She carried the warmth of the inn with her. She would carry it for a long time.